Hello all, welcome to this webinar on the road to digitalization, a lead through cybersecurity, brought to you by Siemens. I'm Adam from Oil and Gas IQ and I'll be your host for this session. The presentation will take around 30 minutes, but we'll follow that with a 15-minute Q&A session, so be sure to stick around. That means if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, you can type them into the Q&A box that appears on your screen at any time and we'll get to those at the end. Please ensure that you have a flash player enabled and all of your volume buttons are switched on. If you do have any technical issues, such as being unable to see the slides or hearing our speakers, please also use the Q&A box to let us know and our team will provide some assistance. So before we do kick off, I'd like to remind everyone attending that today is a live event and we encourage questions from the audience at any stage, and just leave those in the box. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Leo Simonovich, Vice President and Global Head, Industrial, Cyber and Digital Security at Siemens. So Leo, over to you.
Thanks so much, Adam. Hello, everyone. Digitalization offers enormous promise to optimize operations, generate new revenue streams. At the core of digitalization is trust. That is the indiscriminate trust of devices, data, and people. Yet the latest wave of cyber attacks has eroded trust, paralyzing the energy industry from taking advantage of digitalization and taking action on security. This is especially true in critical infrastructure, which has been a latecomer to IoT, where both the benefits and the risks are so great. In many ways, digitalization and cyber are two sides of the same coin. We must get cybersecurity right to enable digitalization. Digitalization, in turn, offers enormous promise to build attack-resilient infrastructure through distributed energy, batch manufacturing, and cloud-based low-cost disaster recovery. What we will do in this presentation is get a view into the risks, readiness, and solutions that the energy industry can undertake to both address the growing and increasingly sophisticated threat of industrial security, but also take advantage of digitalization. It really is two sides of the same coin. Starting with the industrial cyber threat. The number of attacks targeting or originating in the industrial environment, or what is commonly referred to as operational technology, has increased from low single digits from just a few years ago to over 30%. Industrial cyber has become the new risk frontier. And it's no surprise, because if we think about the impact of a potential cyber attack against critical infrastructure, it can be devastating. It can lead both to a safety event and a major impact. OT cyber has become, in the minds of the respondents that we surveyed together with the Ponemon Institute, targeting the oil and gas industry, as a greater concern than IT. Most oil and gas companies today are not ready to respond. They're worried about this risk. They're aware of it. And yet, they don't know what to do about it. This risk in oil and gas, but I think this is largely true for the utility and grid side as well, is evenly spread. It sits at the wellhead, on the offshore platform, at the refinery, at the power utility, and all the way to the meter. The reason, I think, is nicely illustrated here. In oil and gas in particular, the intelligence increasingly sits at the edge. The asset owners have to address the risk, but very often they're not the ones that are operating or servicing the equipment. The complexity of data traveling from the field to the control room to the enterprise network and all the way down to the technology stack. And the requirement of digitalization that devices be indiscriminately added to the network creates a challenge that needs to be addressed and must be addressed. It's important when I talk to customers that security scale with digitalization. But as you can see from this picture, in a world where the intelligence is being pushed up to the IT layer and all the way down to the sensor, that's hard. Security must keep up. It must scale digitalization, but it must do so smartly. We had surveyed the oil and gas companies together with the Ponemon Institute. And what we found is that 72% of all respondents told us they were not ready. They ranked themselves as being low or medium maturity. That's a problem. This is especially a problem for small and medium-sized companies. Once you get out of the majors, those are the companies that are struggling with lack of qualified personnel, legacy, aging assets that are anywhere between 20 and even 50 years old. It's that middle that needs to be secured, because we're only as good as the weakest link. In a supply chain that has a long tail, it's important that we secure the small companies that are servicing us. Lifting that middle will require thinking about maturing these organizations. The challenge, of course, is not just a people challenge or a legacy asset challenge. It's also a challenge of technology. And what you see on this slide is that there are really two buckets of problems that all oil and gas companies are dealing with. One is how to address fundamentals, deal with basic hygiene. The other is how to get visibility into the operating environment, how to begin to monitor. I would argue that you have to do both. And in this lies the challenge, that we have to apply advanced technology to keep up with machine speed attacks. We have to address security through analytics, but we also have to deal with the basics. Just a couple of months ago, there was an attack against 6 pipeline companies. What was noteworthy about that attack is A, how quickly it spread, B, how the attackers got in. It was the vendor that was servicing the IT side, the ERP system, that got in. And through that, the piece of malware traveled very quickly throughout the enterprise network and then got into what we call the DMZ, or the demilitarized zone. Thankfully, the operations were not impacted. With just a small lateral move, however, by the attacker, we could have had a shutdown or a safety event. If we think about connectivity, and I hear our customers react to all the news and the confusion around mega attacks like WannaCry or NotPetya, their initial gut feeling is to disconnect. Well, the other thing that we found is that the majority of the attacks come from the inside. Insider threat, whether it's inadvertent or done on purpose, represents about 70% of all attacks today happening in OT. That obviously is going to change with increased connectivity. The point is that by disconnecting doesn't make us safe. In fact, we lose visibility. And when that visibility is lost, we're operating blind. You cannot protect what you cannot see. An interesting statistic is that a piece of malware on the OT network sits there for twice as long, undetected, as one that sits on the IT network. That's an important statistic. And what that says is that visibility is the core problem that needs to be solved while addressing fundamentals. Today, most companies rank within the energy space. Cybersecurity is their top 3 risk, up there with natural disasters. And yet, despite having awareness, they don't know how to get started. So they need a strategy, but they also need the right kind of organization to support them. That's a people problem. The other challenge is that today IT and OT are not well aligned within most oil and gas companies. Which means that if you think about the single painted glass, the necessity for it, the lateral movements of attackers that are hopping from the IT side to OT, and by the way, vice versa, the collaboration to get that visibility, that single painted glass, is essential. The other piece, of course, is that if you look at the necessary capabilities in-house, most oil and gas companies have 1, maybe 2 people that are addressing operational technology. They don't have a roadmap, they don't have a program, and they don't have the people. That's concerning. And so it's important to create the right kind of ownership in these organizations to address cyber. What's also important is to couple that with analytics. Analytics that allows us to get transparency, visibility, detection, be faster at responding in a world where the probability of being attacked is 100%. for most oil and gas companies is the key. And yet, while 63% of oil and gas companies say we want to use analytics, only 20% can do so today. So for the rest of my presentation, I want to focus on the power of analytics, on the power of visibility, coming back to the theme of digitalization and security being two sides of the same coin. What you will see is that the data that's collected to run and optimize our operations, to take advantage of digitalization, to achieve new revenue streams, to perform real-time asset monitoring, to create just-in-time supply chains, to do batch manufacturing at the site, to do 3D printing. That data can also be used as an indicator of compromise, to understand what's happening in the environment. So let's walk through this. In today's world, because of the organizational challenges, because of lack of ownership for operational technology, data that's necessary to detect sits in many different places. It's siloed. Some of it sits with the line staff that's out in the field that's performing operations and maintenance activities. Some of it, and this is especially true in upstream, sits with asset owners, whereas other data sits with the servicers and all the way down to the supply chain. Some of it sits with IT. From the kind of data that needs to be collected and the repositories that need to be tapped, we also need to look at the data that focuses on asset monitoring, business performance, operational performance, data that deals with the balance of plant and downstream, drill data, asset integrity data, overall production data, not just the data that looks backward, but data that looks forward. Well, for those listening, you may say, this is really complicated. How do I get started? You're telling me I need all this data. You're telling me it's all over the place. How will I ever apply analytics? Everybody talks about AI. That's the fancy buzzword, artificial intelligence. And there's lots of promise around that. How do I use that in security? What's important, and we'll cover this in a second, is that there are many flavors of visibility, and that it really is a journey. And that getting started with this journey means that you have to do this in blocks. You have to get basic visibility, get more advanced, until you get to a point where you're monitoring your environment. The question that I get asked by oil and gas companies is, do I go deep or do I go wide? And what I would say is, it depends. And what it really depends is on the criticality of assets that you're monitoring. What is important to your business? What is the data that needs to sit at the edge and the data that needs to travel. Security is about data classification and data taxonomy. Because understanding what you need to monitor and what's priority to the business is the starting point, then thinking about how you get visibility. Ukraine demonstrates very nicely the power of analytics, but also the necessity and the importance of incorporating operational data. For the first 4 hours, the operator did not know that he was experiencing a cyber attack. He thought that his control system was malfunctioning. His network data was telling him everything was fine. His control system data was blue screening. The mouse on his computer started to move in weird ways. Fast forward 8 hours. 225,000 residents lost their power in the dead of winter for 2 weeks. The takeaway from that is not to disconnect. Of course, it's important to have backup and recovery and redundancy built into the system. Rather, the point is take all this data and correlate it to actually understand what's happening, to detect. So the magic formula, and this is where we at Siemens have spent quite a bit of our time in building our operational technology offering and capabilities to the market, first for ourselves, and now increasingly for our customers. That magic formula is as follows. You have to look at asset data. You have to combine this with control layer data. And by assets, I mean turbines, drills, offshore platforms. Combining that with control level data plus network level data. By looking at the network alone, we're at maximum can only get 30 to 40% visibility. It's better than nothing, but we're still, in many ways, operating blind. Combining the 3 data streams, running analytics on it, doing it smartly, scaling that with the business, thinking about smart connectivity. That is the magic formula that needs to be implemented. Really large oil and gas companies are doing this today. For many of the small ones, this is mission impossible. Just too complicated. Data is not available, needs to be cleaned, there's no ownership, there's not enough staff. All of these are challenges. And so we took it on ourselves to not just build this capability from the ground up, but also make it easy to use. It's been a journey for us, as I would imagine is a journey for you. So, step 1 is the visibility challenge. Is begin to monitor assets. Well, what does that mean? Knowing what assets you have, getting basic inventory, is step 1. This is what most oil and gas companies are struggling with today. They may know their major components. They may know what's on their network. For those of you listening, you're intimately familiar that a lot of devices, however, have unidirectional connectivity. A PLC may be directly connected to a turbine or a compressor. Discovering that PLC, especially if it's critical to the production process, discovering that RTU, understanding what's underneath that field SCADA is really important. That is step one, prioritizing your inventory, collecting that information, being able to do it in real time. That is a step that is going to get you very far. Because once you know what you have, you can begin to think about how to segment it, how to prioritize it across three dimensions: the business dimension, the operational dimension, and the security dimension. And then you can figure out what you should be monitoring. Doing asset discovery cannot just happen on the wire network. It also has to be done at the control layer and all the way down to the sensor if possible. Done smartly, done, of course, with limited budget, but it has to be done. That's step one. And most companies can do this today. There's technology out there that will allow you to get at this very quickly. The second step is not just to think about assets as devices or endpoints. It's to think of them also as people and data. We call that transient assets. You have to get all the other pieces right. Step one being direct asset protection. Step two being extensive classification. But transient assets becomes really important. A lot of the attacks that we all see in the media involve a vendor coming on site, plugging in his or her laptop or USB stick. Remember, insider threat represents the majority of the attacks today in the OT environment. So how does individuals and that associated data moves across the plant floor or a field site is really important. So being able to look up to transient assets that get added not just by somebody plugging in, we can detect that today, but the people that come on site and how they operate those assets is also an important step. That's step two. From there, step three is really to think about once you are knowing what you have, you've prioritized it, you can do real asset discovery. Then the question is, how can you begin to monitor those assets? And do that continuously. Of course, the problem with that is non-standard protocols. Those have to be addressed. we and some others have addressed this to a large extent. It's important to begin to do that monitoring. It's important to combine the three different asset control layer and network data streams into a single view to do detection. Most of the time, the alarms that will result from this kind of monitoring are going to be false positives. But what they will also tell you is that when a compressor is malfunctioning, there's a reason for it. It may be a lagging indicator. It could also be an opportunity to provide preventive maintenance, to streamline or enhance operational efficiency, but also to do detection. So the validation of detected events is really key. From there, of course, it's important to understand how a piece of malware moves across your environment, how quickly it can leapfrog, where can it go. Doing that type of scenario mapping becomes quite important. And then, of course, the other piece of this, once you detect it, once you know where the piece of malware is going, and this is a question of hours, and if you become really advanced, of minutes, then you got to figure out how to quarantine them. But not in a reactive way. That incident response plan for OT, which most organizations do not have today, is a must. Training against that, providing your staff with awareness, doing tabletop exercises is really important. Initially, when you start to do this type of monitoring that's continuous, there are going to be a lot of false positives. And what's important is to establish the right kinds of rules. Today, the most important ingredient in detection is domain knowledge. Actually understanding what a particular asset means, having context behind that asset, understanding its topology, where it sits in the production process. How important is this? We call this process security analytics. That context will allow oil and gas companies to prioritize. There was an article just about a year ago about an offshore platform off the coast of West Africa that was hacked. The hackers were using the GPS system to mess with the buoyancy of the offshore platform. That is the use case, especially in the offshore environment, that needs to be solved for. There are many others, especially around insider threat. So, from an alert point of view, the real-time contextual information, not just about detecting the anomalies, but understanding what it means is important. Having a set of rules and a plan that allows you to prioritize workload, but also deploy resources is important. We're working with customers that want 24/7 incident response globally. Their key requirement is do no harm. In other words, right, once you've detected it, most of the intelligence and most of the thinking needs to occur at the Security Operations Center. Because once the control engineer is deployed on site, they're touching, very often, live equipment. If you bring that live equipment down, that can cost millions of dollars on a daily basis. So do no harm means that that individual has to be an expert, has to understand the particular asset, the operating environment, and has to do the containment in a structured way. Much of that pre-work has to be done before that person ever comes on site. And in this lies the power of analytics. In this lies the power of digitalization. So, a few takeaways. Knowledge is really important. Yes, this is a complex problem, but as I think I've described, and I would love to take your questions on this, it is not a problem that is impossible to address. In fact, if done smartly, done in blocks, done incrementally, right, all of you can mature your enterprise. It may be that doing so will require asking for help. It may be that there are specialists from the OT that can support you. There's technology out there that exists to address phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 of the, what I would call the visibility journey. Second, understanding and having knowledge is important. The second piece is, of course, about implementation. That's really key. But to me, this is the hardest problem that needs to be solved. Having real expertise behind this, domain expertise for the OT is important. Just picking solutions from the IT and saying this is going to apply in the operational technology environment is a recipe for disaster. Third, of course, is doing those security analytics, hopefully in real time, but really including your assets as part of the equation. And then lastly, driving more value out of security. So it's important to create that feedback loop that allows, when you do monitoring for security, to operations and efficiency. Because, as we talked about, digitalization and security are two sides of the same coin. You cannot take advantage of digitalization without security, and vice versa. Thank you. Happy to take your questions.
Thank you for the insightful presentation, Leo. Fantastic stuff there. We now have time for some audience participation. Many of you actually have already submitted questions, but I'm sure a few of you have some burning questions. So if you do, please type them into the Q&A box on your screen and send them in now. So the first question we have, how do we know where we are most vulnerable?
Great question. That begins with understanding, and I go back to this, with understanding what assets you have. It's not about the theoretical vulnerability, because there's lots out there. With these mega attacks like WannaCry and NotPetya, and I think we'll see more of these attacks happening. It's not about the theoretical vulnerability, but how does that vulnerability impact me? How do I know what's unpatched? Well, it's not just about what's unpatched or how vulnerable it is, but how important is it to my operations? So creating a prioritization across those three criteria: business importance, operational importance, and risk. Risk being the vulnerability or risk sitting inside my perimeter, but also out there in the wild. Using those three criteria to prioritize tells you how vulnerable you are.
Okay, excellent. And we've got another question here. What is the average time it takes to implement such a solution in a complex OT environment?
So, because what we would recommend is the importance of doing this in blocks. We've seen customers for phase one, so discovering your assets, prioritizing those assets, matching them against vulnerabilities. For a single plant, get at it in 2 to 3 weeks. That allows you to get started, develop a baseline. From there, of course, you need an implementation roadmap, and you need a scaling plan. But for a single plant, it can be done fairly quickly to give you at least minimum visibility to get started.
Okay, and the next question: what are the most critical assets we must protect? Where should be the primary focus of an OT cybersecurity solution? Prevention, detection, or monitoring?
I think you have to do all three. Now, what I'd say is important is that analytics can help you across all three. It can help you with detection, right? And that detection can be used to improve your readiness levels by discovering vulnerabilities before the bad guys do. It could also be used at the time of the attack to respond, right? Then it becomes more powerful because you're at the time of crisis, and it is a matter of minutes and hours, not days, especially in the OT. In the world, I think, and in the reality of mega attacks, where the probability is 100% of being attacked and that attack being successful, it's really important to, of course, focus on prevention, but it's also important to focus on detection and response. And I think this is a new reality that we have to live with. It's a reality that, there's only two types of companies out there: those that have been hacked and don't know it, and those that have been hacked and do. And those that have been hacked and do are much better at responding. So this is where I think it's really a shift in mentality, a paradigm shift. There's no such thing as bulletproof security. So what's important, I think, is to get used to the idea that attacks will happen, and that analytics is sort of the secret sauce that should be applied across that value chain, from prevention all the way to response.
Okay, excellent. And just continuing on that a little bit, we've got a question here asking if you could elaborate on the execution part of intrusion detection a little bit and just explain how that works.
Yeah, sure. So I think there's two phases to it. One is what I would call the stand-up phase or the calibration phase. That's really important. Sort of understanding the environment is key. It's not just about putting the box on a network, right, or ingesting the different data streams that I talked about. It's really important to create the ground rules that prioritize and help you focus on what matters. I call that sort of the stand-up piece. The other piece of the execution is really around tiering the alarms that come in, contextualizing those, running what-if scenarios around them. Now, this can be done, in an in-house security operations center. But, it's early days in the market in the OT, and most customers of ours don't have the capabilities in-house to do this, right? So oftentimes they've asked us to come in and help them with that tiering and that prioritization, that contextualization, so they can make better decisions, smarter decisions in reaction. So I break it down into two phases. Expect the stand-up phase to be one where you have to look deeper into your business priorities and do a lot of the planning and the sort of the business case work up front to say, here are the things that are important to me because I can't monitor everything. So I'm only going to focus on the assets that do matter. And out of those assets, I'm going to calibrate and filter against my risk appetite. And only then from there can I think about, well, how do I in real time tier the alarms that do come in so that I can work with my partners, my OT partners, to help me detect and respond.
Okay, fantastic. We have time for a few more questions. This one is about team roles. Would you be able to elaborate on, the team roles you would recommend for a team handling or implementing cybersecurity for several operating assets?
Yeah. I think it needs to be a cross-disciplinary team that doesn't just involve the control engineer or the CISO or the vendor. It has to be a combination of all three. Where it starts is with a single owner for OT security, someone that's responsible for strategy. It's also important to have, no matter what approach you take to the operating model, where the OT security sits with the CISO or it sits at the at the operational level, no matter what approach you take, it's also important to have a security architect, because there's not a single one-stop shop for OT security. We've tried to bridge that gap at Siemens for our customers to bring best-in-breed technologies together to make sure that those technologies work. For customers that sort of undertake this journey by themselves, it's important to have a solution architect that can take those different ingredients and pull them together, right? That person has to understand networks, control systems, and also how assets function. You have to have somebody that's focused on change management. That's the third role. It's really, really, really important, because a lot of this is a people problem. You can't solve it all with technology, right? A lot of this stuff cannot be patched. So you have to have different mitigating controls that focus on process. And somebody that does transformation, right, and can help mature and bring awareness. Call them an evangelist, right, which is someone that speaks the OT language. Because oftentimes what happens is that corporate comes in and says, I can help you address OT security. And they want to muck around with your stuff. And that raised a lot of alarms, a lot of concern. So that person has to really come from within, speak the language. And then the last piece, of course, involve your OEMs. They're an integral partner. Whether you use the OEM to just do product security or you use them to provide OT security services, tap what's available. They can help you mature quicker.
Okay, great. And then moving on to the next question. Would you recommend implementing security analytics at the level of the basic control group, PLC, the DCS, or the process data historian?
That's sort of like asking what your religious preference is. I'd say you have to do all of it, but you don't have infinite money. So I think and budget. So I think what's important is starting with where the risk is, and understanding what assets are critical to your production network. There's been a lot of focus on PLCs, and that's and for the right reasons. If you think about some of the major incidents that have occurred, but realistically, I think the control layer, especially the data that's available through the historian, is really powerful. We're partnering with a company called PAS that allows us to do asset discovery in real time all the way down to the sensor by implementing the solutions at the control layer. You also have to do this at the network layer. In the combination of those two things, will allow you to get 80 to 90% asset inventory. And then I think there needs to be a focus on sort of the PLCs and what's critical for those that are unidirectionally connected. It's important. I'm not sure it would be the first place to start unless those PLCs are really key. I'd really focus on the control and the network layer.
Okay, excellent. So we're running out of time, unfortunately, so I think we have time for just one more question, though. Are you going to extend cybersecurity to other Siemens products and solutions as well? For example, building automation and Siemens security solutions?
Yeah, we have a holistic approach to OT security. We know when you're securing the asset, you have to secure the complete operating asset. And increasingly, our customers are saying to us, listen, we need you to secure, because we need you to secure the complete operating environment, you secure all the equipment. And the approach that we develop is really holistic. And that allows us to tackle different asset types, not just ours.
Okay, fantastic. So that brings us to a close for today. So now I'd like to thank Leo for providing his time and insight, as well as those in the audience who took part and answered some excellent burning questions there. If your question hasn't been addressed, we've got a few here, but don't worry, we have your details, so you'll be contacted by the team in due course. If you'd like to rewatch this presentation or share it with your colleagues, you'll receive a link to watch it on demand shortly as well. And thanks to everyone. This concludes the presentation. I'd also like to say as well that Leo will be at the Offshore Northern Sea Conference in Norway, and that takes place on the 27th of August to the 30th. So if you'd like to drop by his booth there and have a chat with him, that's greatly advised. So yeah, with that, wish you all a very good day, and I'm sure we've all learned a lot of insights there. Excellent.
Thanks so much, everyone.